In the Jewish tradition, sex serves a particular purpose, and this is not just for reproduction, as important as that is. Sex is an act which is celebrated and encouraged in the Jewish tradition. It is beautiful, it is joyful, and it is one of humankind's great forms of expression. The rabbis, in framing the discussion about sex, use the term kedusha, which means sanctity as prescribed by the divine. In other words, sex has an integral place in the life of worship. The beauty of the term kedusha is that its root speaks to both the negative and the positive. That's to say that that same root for the term kedusha was used to describe the temple prostitutes, actually, back a couple of millennia ago. That is the negative side of the term. But the same inclination, the same drive, when used properly, is holy, is completely, as in H-O-L-I, completely the opposite. So there's an implicit recognition in the use of this term that sex can be destructive, but it can also be greatly constructive. And again, not just for reproduction, but for beauty. Both sex and the proper use of sex in the rabbinic understanding is woven into the core stories of our tradition. So this is to say, in the book of Genesis, the first humans are Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were exclusively devoted to each other, you could argue, because they were the only humans, but they were exclusively devoted to each other, and as the text says, they unified in basar echad, that's one flesh. They unified in almost literal way, in a sexual way. And there's a rabbinic tradition in a metaphorical homily called the Midrash, which says that Adam and Eve actually got married according to a fairly modern religious rite. And there the entire community around them, as it were, whatever that community was, danced and sang with them under bejeweled wedding canopies. Now, it's amusing, the thought is amusing because that's not there in the text of the book of Genesis, but the teaching behind that is that not only were Adam and Eve unified in a sexual way and unified by commitment and love, but also they got married. This is to say that it's not enough to say that sex is a part of the human condition, for it certainly is. Equally so, in our tradition, marriage is part of the human condition. The rabbis are teaching us that Adam and Eve needed the ritual, the rite, they needed the communal aspect of their marriage in order for it to last and in order for it to really be a proper expression of their sexual self.
Marriage and sexuality in the Catholic faith is probably the most central tenet, if not analogy, of the entire salvation story. Literally from Genesis through Revelation, marriage is understood both in Scripture and in this salvation story of creation, fall, and redemption as the central theme that lets us understand why we were created in the image and likeness of God, male and female. The entire prophecy and the prophets that speak about God wanting to enter into covenant with us, intimate union, and the marriage analogy either be very explicit, and like it's in the prophet Hosea, or in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel. There's no coincidence the church looks at Christ performing his first public miracle at a wedding. The significance of St. Paul describing not only the inner life of God himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but our relationship with Christ and the church in marital terms, and then bringing it all the way down to the very union of a husband and a wife. And it's no coincidence that Revelation, literally the end story, the eternity, is described in marital, spousal terms. So I would say in the Catholic faith, we recognize marriage not just as something that is honorable, just good and worthy of dignity, but something that actually takes us from our own desires, our own experience in life, our own identity as male and female, and brings us all the way through not only our lives, but into the entire human history. I find the Catholic Church's teaching on sexuality to be the most liberating and honorable presentation that's not just a lofty, abstract idea that sounds good or looks good in comparison to others, but one that in every day is operable. It's something that matters when I wake up in the morning. It matters when I go to sleep at night. It matters the way that I look at my wife and the way that I look at my children and being a father, being a husband. All those relationships that pour into the identity of being a son of God, of ordering my life and discerning on this day whether this is good act or whether this act is bad. Very concrete ways in a day-to-day draw from a dignity, a reverence, an awe, a worth that really can be traced with enough whys back really to the original story of Genesis. And that original Genesis story of being created in the image and the likeness of God, comma, male and female, he created them. And he blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. We see the full perspective that, in fact, we are made for communion. We're made for relationship from the very beginning. And we're called to perfect that call to communion and relationship. And the perfection is in God himself. So the Catholic Church teaches that our call for communion, our drive and desire for relationship has an origin in God. It has a destiny in God. And it's meant to be operable in this moment for us to move along that trajectory toward God.
It is a central theme in our religion is the theme of the family, the importance of maintaining the family unit, and marriage is seen as the cornerstone of that family unit. And as marriage is the cornerstone of the family unit, the family is also the cornerstone of the larger community, which is the cornerstone of the entire world, essentially. So it does play a huge role from the perspective of faith and also from maintaining the concept of a functional society. What the religion says about marriage, we, as Muslims, we follow both the Quran, which is the holy book that guides us in terms of the restrictions, the concepts of faith, essentially the way to live our lives. We also follow the Sunnah, which is the traditions of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And in putting the two together, we get a better perspective of what it means to be a Muslim, how to live as a Muslim, and where does marriage come into play in that whole scheme. So in reality, one of the verses in the Quran talks about marriage as being a union between the man and the woman and a place of mawaddatan wa rahma, which means a place where there is care and mercy. It's also described as a place where a couple finds rest. They find a connection, almost like a cocoon that protects the couple from everything that's going on in the world. There's another verse in the Quran that describes the marriage relationship as they are your garments and you are their garments. So it's a verse that's directed to both the man and the woman and explaining that both men and women in the marriage relationship are there to protect each other. We believe that every religion has a defining characteristic, and the defining characteristic of Islam is al-haya, which is the Arabic word for modesty. And that sense of modesty, again, it applies to both men and women, even though a lot of times in the Muslim faith, people feel that women are more visible in terms of acting upon the modesty because of, for example, the way that I'm dressed, the covering of the hair, the covering of, the body wearing loose clothing, and just allowing the face and the hands to show. This is called hijab, and along with this way of dressing definitely comes a way of acting. So modesty for men and women, how does it apply to building relationships? Or the other question that a lot of people always ask is, well, then how do you get married if you're saying that, you can't really have that dating culture, you can't have that hookup culture? How can people connect and know whether or not this is someone they want to spend the rest of their life with? One way that I liken it to is when you look at, for instance, Little House on the Prairie. That was a show that I used to watch growing up. But that concept of courtship, where when someone is interested in someone else, they pursue the courtship through the family. They'll enter the family's home, they'll meet with the family. And this is really the view that we have in Islam of marriage, that it's not just a he and a she that's getting married, but it's a he and a she and a family and a family and a community and all the baggage that comes with it. So it's a really big connection, not just two individuals. And I think when you're living in a world that's very focused on individualism, you lose sense and you lose sight of what it means to have a connection that is building the foundation for a future in terms of a family, a community, and a society.
How does our view of sex fit within the way that we live our day-to-day lives, the way that we evangelize, the way that we communicate the faith, and the way that we practice the faith. I think there's two main things that are at play here. One reflects the character of God. This covenant of marriage is intended ultimately to reflect God's commitment to his people and to his creation, that he will never abandon them, he will never leave them alone, and he has chosen a people within that to bless all nations through a covenant that he has made. And he is essentially the ultimate, ideal, faithful spouse who will never abandon that purpose in creation. And the Christian faith sees this ultimately in Jesus, who lays down his life for this creation in order to restore and renew so this relationship can be whole. And so throughout the scriptures, what you see in the canon that the Christian faith has is that God is constantly called the bridegroom or even the husband of his people, and we are his bride. And there's this beautiful imagery in the New Testament of Jesus' love for the church, and that he desires to wash her with the word, without spot, without wrinkle, without blemish, and ultimately present the church with splendor in the end. That's just a beautiful picture. And so marriage itself actually communicates what we would call the gospel, the good news of Jesus having come and taking on sin and now renews creation and now rules and reigns as this faithful king, but also a faithful spouse. In evangelization and proclaiming the gospel and the way that we articulate who God is, marriage can actually be the metaphor that tells the whole story of creation. The Christian faith does teach that sex should remain within the covenant of marriage and not be practiced outside of that. And there are so many reasons why that is. A good analogy is just that of fire. I mean, fire is this beautiful, powerful, and can be a very good thing, or it can be a very destructive thing. Fire, when contained in the fireplace in a home, in its proper context, provides warmth, it provides light, and gives life to that home. If it comes out of that fireplace and then begins to consume the home, it no longer brings, it still brings warmth, it still brings light, but it's not something that's life-giving. It actually ends up being destructive. And since our bodies, when we have sex, are making this pledge to another person that I am yours wholly, completely, in a lifelong commitment, if we're not making that after we've done this verbally, emotionally, and spiritually, and then we pull away from that relationship in something like the hookup culture that we see that's so prevalent, especially on college campuses, then it's no wonder that we see this brokenness.
One of the things that I think that's central to that for Latter-day Saints is the sense that God has a plan for us. For us, a very important part of that plan is agency. And that's not just the freedom to do anything. Agency has a lovely double entendre. It can mean both that you are an actor as opposed to being acted upon, but it can also mean that you are someone's agent. And in our understanding of God having a plan, we become God's agent in each other's lives, and that has very important implications for our sexuality. At the very least, it means that sexuality is something sexual actions, sexual relations of all kinds are things we do, not things that happen to us. We are, in fact, actors. But it also means that there is an important relational context in which we understand how we are behaving sexually, what that means to other people, and what that's about. I want to read briefly from the family proclamation that was issued in 1995 by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. It says, in part, "We declare the means by which mortal life is created to be divinely appointed. We affirm the sanctity of life and of its importance in God's eternal plan." That's already been mentioned at the beginning, where they say, "We, the First Presidency and the Council of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, solemnly proclaim that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God, and that the family is central to the Creator's plan for the eternal destiny of His children." I think it's significant then that the only reference to sexuality directly in this document calls it the means by which mortal life is created. Sexuality clearly has a relational aspect between a husband and wife, and we are very sympathetic listening to our Catholic friends talk about the procreative and the unitive functions of sexuality. But that unitive function can't be independent of the fact that procreation is always a possibility. And what that means is a family is in play. In preparation for marriage in the temple, we make a covenant about how we will have sexual relations and that we won't have sexual relations with anyone but our husband or wife. And I think that has an interesting effect when we take it seriously. I won't say that we always take it as seriously as we should, but I think the necessary implication, if we look at what that really means, is that sexuality goes out of play in other relationships, and that allows us to be a community in a very particular, very deep, and very trusting way. In the end, then, I think chastity, which at the beginning, if we only work from the biblical lexicon, looks like a lot of prohibitions, really becomes something a lot more positive, a genuine virtue, a positive good. That means it's a way of having my sexuality, an awareness of my ability to procreate, my ability to create family in a way that blesses the lives of everyone I touch.